Hi, and welcome to my podcast, What's the Value of Addiction? My name is Brendon Watt. I'm an alcoholic and an addict, and I've been sober since April 2022. On this podcast, I will share my journey and the tools I've used to create a life that is not perfect, but a lot kinder and truer for me. I hope it can be a contribution to you so that you know that no matter where you are on this journey, something truly different is possible. Okay, Shannon O'Hara, welcome.
Hello, hello.
Hello, hello. Welcome to my podcast, and thank you for being my very first guest here.
Excited to be here.
Oh my goodness, exciting. So I know I told you this a little bit ago, but one of the things that you said to me really early on in my sobriety that still just pops into my head, and it's one of the things that really, I guess, made me realize that there was a big journey ahead. And the thing that you said was, if you get through this, it's going to be a miracle.
Which could easily sound like a bitch move. Like that, people could be like, "Oh my god, what a cunt! This guy's like trying to be sober." And she's like, "If you get through this, it's gonna be a miracle." But
yeah, it wasn't actually.
No,
it wasn't that. And one of the things that was so helpful for me in the beginning, like I've had many conversations with your dad about this, where if I would have been coddled at all, like if people would have been like, "You go, you've got this, like you can do it."
Those people would have no idea what the beast of addiction really was.
No. And so that it was something where I went, "Oh, this is," I think for me, one of the things was it was so easy to put my head in the sand, and addiction was so helpful for that. And with sobriety, it was one thing that I was going to have to learn not to do. So what I want to ask you about, because I think it's definitely been one of the things that I've avoided as a topic over the years. And you are the creator of Talk to the Entities. Yeah, is entities and addiction. My first question is with it. The thing I want to look at is where people, especially with the topic of addiction, will avoid accountability with entities.
Yeah. Well, it's so absolutely perfect that you're bringing this up. Actually, Brendon and I did not talk about this before we started at all, but the interesting thing that's occurring is I'm featuring a Talk to the Entities specialty each month, starting this month, and it'll go on for actually 13 more months because that's how many specialties there are. But next month, the specialty highlight focuses entities and addiction. So It's like the fact that you're bringing it up right now, I'm like, wow, because I was literally just starting to write out the notes to start to put the campaign into its flow. So cool.
Well, that's cool, because I was looking at it before this and I was like, oh, I've always avoided that topic. And it was interesting early on because I had a lot of people had a lot of points of view about what was going on. And, one of the big ones was, well, did an entity make him do it?
Right. So the premise of entities and addiction is this, which is entities are not responsible for all addiction, but it is wise to include information and tools about how to deal with entities in any kind of drug or alcohol or addiction program for entities can be a component for many in that area.
So let's look at that. What are the tools? Like, let's say with dealing with, whether you've still got a problem of, man, I wish I could change this, and don't seem to know where to begin. Or I guess even like the first 6 months of sobriety for me, I haven't really talked about it that much, but it was dark. It was.
So yeah, and I think that's it's such a breath of fresh air to hear you say it and to put it out there, and it takes so much courage to even to be able to articulate these very charged, touchy, weird areas. I think I want to give a little bit of my credentials to be able to deal with addiction in the first place. I have no credentials other than I come from a family of addicts, which gives me a lot of firsthand experience of how to, my oldest brother was, by the time he was 13 years old, he was snorting cocaine and living on the streets of Los Angeles. Like, he took a really hardcore journey. And my biological father has been a substance abuser. All the men, really, except for my stepdad. I have cousins who have gone to jail for drunk driving and killing people, and it's so I have a lot of firsthand experience with people who struggle with substance abuse. And when you were coming to the point where you had to make a choice, although I'm not sure there was one point for you, I'm pretty sure it's been a consistent point of choosing. I knew what you were up against more than most people because I have watched people struggle with recovery and addiction basically all my life. And I have actually never seen a single one of the men in my life that I really care for that struggle with addiction recover from it. So when you were starting to come forward as a change, I was like, I don't know, like, I've never seen anyone break this. And like, no pressure. And it's really a testament to your willingness and your strength. But one of to go back to the entity conversation, drugs and alcohol is one of the ways in which most people, it's sort of like one of the achievable ways to deal with awareness that doesn't fit or match. It's an easy suppressor. It's a socially acceptable suppressor. And so if you have, and the difficulty with drugs and alcohol is it actually distorts and perverts entity activity. It doesn't help it. It like makes it way worse. So if you're aware,
what do you mean? What do you mean by that? Distorts and perverts it?
Yeah. When you're talking about entities, I think the first step in this conversation is really just to sort of like admit that there is such a thing, right? That might be a huge leap for a lot of people. So you and I are obviously talking not from that first step. Like, you and I are well versed in the conversation. Obviously, I've made a career out of educating people around the spirit world. But the first step for most people is just that acknowledgement of that entities exist. And they are a huge part of our lives on planet Earth, and all indigenous cultures know it, and many cultures still do know it, but we're in sort of like a different time on the planet where if you can't prove it, it's not real, which, I mean, that's a whole other conversation for another time.
Well, it's interesting too, though, because when I was a kid, like much younger, I remember entities just being a part of, it was just like, oh, hi, it wasn't a big thing.
Right. So, and that's the thing. So it's like when we're talking about entities, I think it's the misconception is that entity means one thing. But when you're dealing with entities, you're actually dealing with a whole kingdom of different kinds of species, essentially, of entities. So you're going to have nature spirits and beings of light and teammates and like kind of like just chill entities who are fun and are beings of consciousness. And then you sort of have like lost entities who were just unconscious in life, and then they lost their body and they never really realized their body died, and they're just sort of lost people. And then you've got a whole other spectrum of malevolence, demons, and stuff that isn't wrong, and we should remove the superstition from it. But it's to recognize that when you're saying entity, we're talking about a large spectrum of activity. And the kind of entities that like to be around drugs and alcohol are usually the kind of entities who are interested in unconsciousness and anti-consciousness and perpetrating unconsciousness and anti-consciousness. And they'll insert themselves into whoever's world they can to achieve that agenda.
Yeah. I want to go back to something that you said, because I knew that you had history with addiction with your family, but I don't think I quite knew to the degree that you've had it. And when you said you knew what I was up against, I kind of I look back at that. I'm kind of glad that I wasn't quite aware of what I was up against.
Right.
But I guess so I had something there where I was going with that, and it just totally left the station. But with the the question I was going to ask, with the people that you've had in your family who have gone through addiction, what do you see with that doesn't work? I mean, besides the obvious of not choosing it.
Like not choosing to
live, not choosing to go, you know what, this is killing me, not making a different choice.
Oh, that's such a big question. I mean, that goes in so many directions.
Because I did a lot of AA, Alcoholics Anonymous.
Yeah.
And it was interesting the way they talked about it also, because in the beginning they would literally say to you, the chances that you've got of getting through this are slim.
Yeah.
A lot of people come in here, a lot of people go back out, and a lot of people die. And it was an interesting thing to look at, but I kind of wondered what gives us the unwillingness to, I guess, say, you know what, I'm going to make a different choice or choices.
I think that that's so subjective due to the person's fundamental point of view about them. I have the most direct connection to my brothers and my biological father, who are all currently even substance abusers. The thing is, I never really fully understood why they would make such a destructive choice. And I stopped wondering a long time ago, because thinking about it always led me down the path of, I guess, conflict in my own world due to the degree of caring I had for them and the sheer destructive power and influence they were willing to exert on themselves and everyone who cared about them.
Yeah. Well, that has been that's been one of the harder things for me to look at. And, you know, I remember I was having a conversation with Gary Douglas, your dad, your stepdad.
Yeah. Not the addicted dad. He's the other one.
Not the addicted dad. He's the other one. But I've had many conversations with him but this one recently, and I was like, how was it for you watching somebody that you care about going through that? And he was just like, it was hard. It was really hard.
Oh, it's excruciating. And that's why when you were sort of going through what you were going through, I was like, fuck you, dude. Like, I had like no sympathy, because I had been dragged already since from a very young age. I had been dragged through the family addiction pummeling fields. And as you know, I got to the point where I was like, I cannot let another self-destructive, self-annihilating person impact my life. Not from a keep out thing, not from a you're wrong, not from a, it wasn't even defensiveness. It was just a pure choice of, okay, if you need to kill yourself, you absolutely have the space to do that. And I'm not going to feed you any energy.
Yeah. Well, you know, the interesting thing was I had to learn one of the things, you know, people would say to me, oh, you know, I thought you were going to get really angry and just leave access and do all these things. And I was like, oh, that was definitely on the cards.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, like that was not something that I avoided. And I was so angry, like at myself, but also at everyone. And all I wanted was for people to save me. And it's interesting in looking at that now, it was the one thing that would have, it was one thing that would have killed me. You know, and I know that. I know if it would have been, come on, we'll do it with you, and you don't have to work at this, and you're not going to have to choose, and we'll lay the path out for you, it wouldn't have worked. And so one of the things I had to learn about was what real caring is.
Mm-hmm.
Because you could easily look at that. You could easily look at, hey, dude, you're on your own, or I'm not going in there with you. I'm not jumping into this. I'm standing from the outside. You could easily look at that as, where's the caring? And
right.
from
but that question, where's the caring, would be coming from somebody who most likely has never directly dealt with an addict.
True story.
Anybody who does and who has dealt with addicts knows that there is a line that has to happen there, because the journey to recovery is a brutal one for the addict. And if they don't start that brutal recovery, it's not going to work.
Yeah. But I love it, because it's you say it as the brutal, like the brutal journey. It is. Oh. And there is nowhere that I want to give anyone the idea that it's not going to be that. And it's one of the things actually that Alcoholics Anonymous, like in going, I did, they say do 90 meetings a day for 90 meetings in 90 days. I did a lot more than that. I went and so much, but it was, they had good points that they were like, they would basically say at the beginning, it's going to be the hardest thing you've ever done.
Right.
But the thing that I was getting at before with the, people come in and people come out. I think for me, and maybe we can speak about this, is one of the things, and it took me a while to get to this, but one of the things I knew I was going to have to get out of was being a victim to it.
Way cool.
And yeah. Do you have something?
Well, I mean, it's that's such a universal remedy for addiction, but also for everything and everyone. I mean, that thing, if people just remove the context of recovery or addiction from the conversation and just look at like, how much do you disadvantage or disempower, or what is it? Do you believe you're a victim in any area? Like, that almost can sound like a trick question, because everyone listening will be like, yeah, I'm a victim to money. I'm a victim to, because my mom won't let me, my husband won't let me, my sister was mean to me, I can't help it, the government won't, like all this, like the psychological structure we put around justifying, which I believe I'm a victim is a justification for powerlessness, which then allows you to perpetrate all sorts of weird stuff on yourself. But then the world, because the victim is actually like an attack point of view, but from like an inward position. And if you stop using victim as a weapon against, what could you create and what could you choose?
Well, it's interesting also that you said it would sound like a trick question, and it could, but it's also like, if you did look at that as a question, what part of your life, what do you have in your life that you're being victim to? If you're willing to look at that area, that would be the area that would allow you to truly like empower yourself.
Yeah.
And like, I know most of the choices that I was making while using were done from unconsciousness. Were done from total unawareness, unconsciousness, anti-consciousness. And I knew for me, that victim mentality was one of the big things that was going to hold it in place. And it took me, the question that I got to was, what's the gift in all of this? But it took me, I would say, I think probably 6 to 8 months to get even to be able to ask that question, there's no gift in this, like this is bullshit that this has happened, and how could this happen? And it was one of the things that started freeing me to go, you know what? I don't know how it happened. All I know is that I chose it. So, what, have you got some?
Oh, I don't know. You go on.
Well, no, I was going to say about because we touched on the entity thing, but I want to see what else is there with the unwillingness to be empowered, how that affects your relationships with entities. Like when I was doing, I'm a victim, how could this happen? It's kind of like that thing of looking for help rather than helping yourself.
I love that distinction. Yeah.
So I'm just wondering with that, because I said before about the thing with the darkness, like it just, like there were days where I didn't even know how to put words to it. But with that, it wasn't until I started asking, really, it wasn't even necessarily asking the question. It was looking from a different perspective with what is the gift in all of this, that things started to lighten.
Right. So so for you, in your recovery journey, like, I know that you alluded to this in the first episode of this podcast that I've accidentally listened to 3 minutes of before we did this session, quote unquote, accidentally listened to. You did mention that you grew up around alcohol and you grew up around alcoholics. And it's always interesting for me because I know that a lot of addiction is seen as a hereditary descent.
Yep.
That being said, it's like I guess for me, I always have found like the psychic healing path is of far more interest to me. And when you're dealing with stuff like addiction, which is a very nonsensical disease, like you can't really make sense of why someone is doing that. And even the people doing it can't make sense of what's going on. So
true story.
It can't be a logical, normal, reasonable place through which that's coming from. So addiction becomes this sort of psychic disorder. And that becomes very exciting because what if people with addiction have these like epic psychic capacities that they're not allowed to have, or that they try to shut down,
I love that because you've heard the thing that, Gary said it forever, is what if your greatest wrongness is your greatest strongness? And I love the lightness in that when you said the first part with the psychic healing and then the second part of the psychic capacities, because I guess for, like I've had so many people say to me also, like with alcoholism, it's an allergy to alcohol. So the thing that I find interesting about it is I found out things about myself that I was really in the beginning really ashamed of. And the thing that was so destructive to me was I kept trying to get away from all of that stuff. Rather than walk through it. And it's been, I guess that part has been an interesting journey because for me, when you're an addict or an alcoholic or both, I was thinking about this yesterday when I was out in the surf, and I was like, it's interesting that I don't see myself as that person anymore, but I could have one drink now and within 2 days be back there.
Yeah. So you've built a superhighway into fucked up. Now, where's the superhighway? Where's the superhighway into energy, space, and consciousness?
Well, yeah. And I want to look at the energy of the first part that you said with the psychic healing. What can you extrapolate on that? Because it's interesting. One of the things that they talk about with addiction is recovery. And one of the things I've had conversations about is recovery is an interesting term, because a lot of people will look for, when am I recovered? You know, as if it's you can recover from addiction. But for me, one of the things I had to, I guess, accept or learn to be with was, it wasn't about recovery, it was about healing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I guess with the psychically, what is that?
Well, I could imagine that when the drugs and alcohol start being utilized, now I'm saying I imagine because I don't know this for a fact. This is a hypothesis based on knowing a lot of substance abusers over the years. I can imagine that when the drugs and alcohol or substances start being utilized, there is some avoidance that is involved in that choice. And if you then continue to avoidance is like one layer, but then when you add drugs and alcohol on top of avoidance, it like morphs and mutates, and alcohol and drugs are so impactful to you psychically and like to a being that it like, you're not just like now in a path of avoid, like just there's like avoidance level number 1, which is sort of like, it has an impact, but it's not like that hardcore. It's just sort of avoidance. But then, you know, you add drugs and alcohol and a lifetime or decades of drug and alcohol utilization, and you're now at like DEFCON avoidance, where what you initially were trying to avoid has now morphed and mutated and like perverted into this like thing that when you stop utilizing the substances, you're going to have to deal with.
Yeah.
So it's sort of like you've made it worse all this time, but did you have the tools or the power or the permission or the access point to deal with whatever you were avoiding initially?
Yeah, no. You know, and I love the way you put that, because it's so true. Like the DEFCON avoidance level. Like it's interesting, because for me, like I could completely become a different person in my head.
What do you mean?
Well, like I would, let's say now, if I was, you know, around a crowd of people, I could quite, without knowing a way of putting it into words, I would be hypersensitive to what was going on in their head, what was going on for them, you know, what was going on in their world, their needs, their, you know, and just have this extreme amount of awareness. And I always had that. Like I remember just being like, what the fuck is wrong with me? And, you know, that was my question as a kid, basically. But with in alcoholism, and especially when it really began to progress, because that was the other thing I was unaware of, how quickly it could grow as a disease, as a thing. But I could, rather than being aware of what's actually going on for people, I could invent what I decided should be going on for people and for myself. So I could live in a fantasy.
Right. Which I guess is a coping strategy. And if you weren't coping and you were actually engaging with energy, then what?
Awareness. Yeah.
So I don't know if like every substance abuser is avoiding awareness. And I really don't know, because I don't know enough.
Well, you know how you said before, like you listened to the podcast, and I grew up with, you know, I grew up around it, but I grew up around people that were not interested. They weren't avoiding awareness. I wouldn't have seen it as something that they were avoiding awareness, which was why I was so confused. And I'll say this, because it was one of the things that had me so stuck, was From what I'd seen as an alcoholic and an addict, that was everything that I didn't want to be. And what I saw myself becoming was exactly that. And it was interesting because when I had so much rage and anger about things that my father did. He was an extremely heavy drinker and a really violent man. And so to me, that was an alcoholic. And it's interesting now as I've gone through my journey, he was never an alcoholic. He was a heavy drinker.
What do you mean?
Because now the difference that I discovered was an alcoholic can't stop. Once, like if I had one drink now, I would be off to the races. See you later. Bye. And it would go from 1 beer to 2 beers to 800 in a heartbeat.
Yeah.
But with him now, he drinks like a, quote unquote normal person.
Right. Interesting. Okay. Well, you could say that, or you could just say he got old and his body can't handle it in the same way he used to be able to.
That's true. Yeah. I wonder about that because there's definitely more for me to discover about how the allergy works.
Yeah. I know that my biological father went from like alcohol consumption to then he shifted his addiction to marijuana because it was sort of like less biologically impactful. As he got older, he shifted his addiction to another substance. And I think that is true for many people because biologically your body just literally can't handle the substance. So you have to, and now we have all these like pharmaceutical options that are biologically cleaner and psychologically way more impactful.
Yeah, true story. True story. I guess what I want to ask, and we can wrap it up soon, is so you mentioned that next month you've got this with Talk to the Entities.
Yeah.
You're featuring this. Like, what's your target with that, or what's your awareness of the future with it? Because one of the things I've been like, I don't think it's quite spoken about, but I've read a lot of different things of how much of a bigger, I guess a bigger thing than a lot of people think it is, especially in the world now, and especially after, COVID and things like that.
What's a bigger thing in the world now?
Addiction. Addictions to anything to escape.
Well, one of the things I've done with Talk to Entities over the years is I make sure to plow a row of clarity in all areas that I've seen entity activity interact with how life expresses itself. And so to give people some context, like there's a lot of Talk to the Entities specialties. One is like children and entities, one's nature spirits, there's ancestral myths, there's house, like how to clear haunted houses, and then there's entities and addiction. Because one of the things that I had to deal with a lot with my older brother, especially growing up, was all of the entities and demons he had around him. And so I have been very up close and personal to the kind of entity activity that substances, drugs and alcohol, create. And the thing with entities is if you don't address it as entities, you never will be able to deal with it. It's sort of like if you have cancer, but you're like calling it the flu, and then like it just gets worse and metastasizes. With entities, you actually have to deal with entities. That being said, I want to be very clear again that entities are not the source and the reason for addiction in a lot of cases. However, people can amass a bunch of entities that really like substance abuse. And then if they don't clear or handle those entities down the track when they themselves want to stop ingesting the substances, they'll have a lot of entities who are constantly sending them to signal to drink or to smoke or to do whatever because the entity is interested in that agenda. So being able to identify and clear and handle drug and alcohol entities can be, in my humble opinion, a huge advantage in any kind of recovery mission.
I love that. So I'm starting this new thing also called A Guide to Sobriety from an Alcoholic and an Addict. And I think that would be, well, it's interesting. I got your dad to help. I got Gary to help me with it. And I said, hey, what about this topic? And it was A Guide to Sobriety for Alcoholics and Addicts. And he said, no, change it to from.
Yeah. Well, I know that they'll, I mean, most people who, if somebody has really dealt with addiction, they're most likely aren't going to trust somebody that hasn't been through it and come through the other side.
Right. Well, what I was going to say with that too is I think that would be a huge gift in including your awareness with that. I think it's a huge guide to sobriety. Big part of it is knowing how to deal with that stuff.
Yeah, definitely. And there is a very specific subsection of people, which is I am one of them, who have a huge, are like what I would call like entity sensitives. And that's not necessarily all addicts at all, but there are very, very entity sensitive people. And a lot of times entity sensitive people end up in mental institutions and in rehabilitation clinics due to never being empowered or educated on how to practically deal with entities. And you said earlier, like, what's the target? Like, what's the vision?
Yeah.
The vision is definitely to educate rather than medicate.
Yeah. Okay. I love that.
Because we talk to the entities can be used very effectively with a lot of psychological disorders, especially the ones where people say they hear voices, because that's an entity awareness indicator, and you have very few professional environments through which they are really practically including entity education. But what you do have is a huge amount of professional treatment centers administering drugs as a solution to an awareness-based possibility.
Yeah. I love that you're doing that. I think it's a huge gift. And I love that you've got the whole, that you're doing those selected months, different topics. That's cool.
Yeah, well, they're classes that already exist and I've done previously, but I had a conversation with a woman who got a session because her daughter was like being demon possessed. And I was like, have you done children? And she really wanted to learn how to work with her daughter and like educate her and empower her. And I was like, well, I've got a whole specialty program for that called Children and Entities. And she had never heard of it, but she had heard of Talk to the Entities. I thought, interesting, like there is such a need for these very specific niche topics.
Yeah.
And I thought, well, let's just display them a bit better so people who are looking can find them.
I love it. It's awesome. Thank you for being here with me. I'm very grateful for this conversation and you.
Well, how exciting. And what a like a courageous thing to put out there in the world. It's really so exciting. And you know, it's I think the respect I have for you to be doing this is huge, because I really do know what you were up against. And I think people who potentially haven't had a lot of firsthand experience with addiction might not get the miracle that you being able to sit here and talk about it and say that you've been sober for X amount of time. And I know you're not saying that anything's handled, because there isn't a point where you reach conclusion of recovery. It's a choice moment by moment.
Well, you know, I saw Tom Hardy, you know, Tom Hardy, the actor.
Yeah.
Well, he's an addict and an alcoholic. I saw this clip that he put on social media a while back, and he just said, I'm an addict and I'm an alcoholic, and I have to keep myself in check every day. Like, I have weird shit come up in my head, and, you know, I've got to be present and honest with myself. And I think that's the thing for me too, is it's not about me ever being recovered. It's like, I have days still where I'm just like, man, it would be easier to drink.
But would it?
No. No. I cannot even. Oh, just no, it wouldn't. But that's an addict mentality.
Yeah,
it's
that's an interesting one. Well, I look forward to I hope that you get to put and make available more of the conversation around sort of like the psychic capacities and awareness as the choice for change.
Yeah. Me too. Thank you.
Awesome.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you so much for listening. I am grateful for your presence. If you enjoyed this podcast, make sure to subscribe and share it with a friend that might benefit from these conversations. For more resources, check out my website, brendonwatt.com, and what else is possible you have never considered.